you the two types of stones. And they're not called stones in the most professional sense. They're called a calculus. A calculus. So you have two types. You have a renal calculus and you have a biliary calculus. So this is the kidney stone and this is the this is the gallstone. But they're called renal calculus and biliary calculus. The lumen, the hole in your ureter that renal calculus passes through is pyramid shaped. It's kind of triangular space in there. So as those stones go through, they are molded into the shape of that lumen. Now these are from a cow. So you see what I mean by them being pyramidal shaped? And ours are too. Ours are just littler, you hope. So these are human ones, and you can pass them around. But they look the same. And they're usually very light and white like that. And if you have a renal calculus, you have to pass it if it starts down your ureter. And you'll know you're passing it because it hurts like the jeepers, they say. And if it stops hurting and it doesn't show up in your urine, then it stopped moving. So then you got to get it moving, or you're going to surgery and they'll remove it because they can't leave your ureter blocked, because then everything's backing up into your kidney and it could put you into a kidney infection and lead to renal failure or something like that. So they'll, apply the fluids to you so that hopefully you'll urinate, and you'll get it moving again. And of course, something like that's going to erode or rip the walls of your ureter as you're passing it, so there's blood usually associated with that as well. There is a calculus that can fill up all of those sinus spaces, those major and minor calyces. And if it did that, that's called a staghorn stone. Back in the past, not so many years ago actually, they would remove that kidney if you got one of those. But now there's sonic treatment, lithotripsy, that busts up stones. And now they'll do that to try to save that kidney. Asians have been doing it for years, but they wouldn't in this country. They just take the kidney out because you can live with one kidney. But now they'll use lithotripsy to try to bust those up. People who are compromised, as in paralysis, are real prone to calculi, renal calculi. And so they're in lithotripsy frequently. And the bad thing about lithotripsy is whatever's entrapped in that mineralized stone, when you bust it up, all that's flooding into your system at once. So you've got a lot of waste that are flooding your system, bacteria. And so a lot of times they'll put that compromised patient on an antibiotic before they even do the lithotripsy to try to hope that they're not overrun with an infection once they do that. The gallbladder makes biliary calculi. They're not pyramid shaped. I'll pass that around. And they're usually dark. Now, Lord, these have been here for decades getting beat around in this bottle. They look like dice. They're that shape, more cube-like instead of pyramidal-like. So here come the biliary calculi. If you had calculi that big in your gallbladder, you would probably have your gallbladder removed because those are too big to pass through the tiny little ducts that leave your gallbladder and go to your duodenum of your small intestine. If they're little ones, you might pass them. So if you have your gallbladder removed, the thing they have to do is also check down all your ducts from there, because if they leave one in a duct, then you're still going to have that excruciating pain, which is the gallbladder attack when you have stones there. So that's sort of a radiating pain all the way across your whole gut, whereas appendicitis tends to be more one-sided, but very, very severe pain for people who have gallstones or biliary calculi. They think what happens to cause those is some food that you eat comes together with the bile and it all sticks together and solidifies. But if they're big and you're gonna lose your gallbladder anyway, they don't usually take the time to analyze them. If they were little ones and you wanted to avoid having your gallbladder out and not form stones in the future, because once you're a stone former, you're more likely to do it, then they would analyze them and tell you what foods to avoid in your particular body that are sticking together with your bile products. We, right here, are on a mineral bed. It's sort of the Mulberry, Fort Meade, you know, the phosphate area. There we've got all that limestone deposits and stuff, and they dissolve in your water, and so you're ingesting a lot of that. Well, if genetically you don't tend to be a stone former, then that might not be a problem. But once you form one stone, or you know it runs in your family, you're more likely to form others in the future. That's when they'll tell you to get a water filtration device on your home to remove some of those minerals out of there so that it reduces the chance that you do one of these again. So you do need to know these two vocabulary words for the lab test, biliary calculus and renal calculus. We're talking about kidney stones, whoever just came in, and gallstones. Any question on this? So your lab test is Monday, and it always includes all the labs up to that lab test. So this is a digestive plus urinary anatomy and urinalysis lab test. And don't forget your 3 digestive enzyme experiments that you did as well. Was everybody here last time? Raise your hand if you were not in the last lecture. Italian, like pizza. Y'all don't smell it?
Oh, that's not.
Are they giving away free food or something today? So make sure you get this handout ready that you had last time. Did I give you the right one, Campbell? Okay. So these will be, I guess they'll be up on the front instructor desk. That's where I'm going to leave them if you, for any reason, need to look at them again. You have a little jar of them, not the gallstones, but the kidney stones. You have a little jar of them on your actual table today. So you might have noticed those. But all right. What's your body's first choice food to catabolize, to get the energy out of the food to make the bonds of ATP? Glucose. So we found out there's 4 steps in this process, and the first step is called glycolysis because we're basically splitting our big sugar in half. And we found out when we did that we did make 4 ATPs, but the problem was to get the big old sugar in the position to carve it in half, we used up 2 ATPs in the first place. So we had to pay them back like paying bills. So we only netted a total of 2 ATPs. Are you cool on that? And as we're breaking down our food, oftentimes the hydrogens come off as electrons and protons, negative E's and positive protons. And so they are picked up by various hydrogen acceptor molecules. The most numerous one in this story is NAD. So we made 2 NADH2s in this process of splitting our sugar in half. And so if we were asked, what food did you start with? You started with glucose. What food scrap did you end with? You ended up with 2 pyruvates, and then you summarize what you made. And where in the cell were we? The cytoplasm. So you didn't have any needs for oxygen, or it didn't have to be anaerobic either. So now we're trying to get into the powerhouse of the cell, and that organelle is called the mitochondrion. That's where you make the majority of your ATP. And a mitochondrion won't work unless it has oxygen. So this is strictly aerobic from here to the end of the piece of paper. And it's all in the mitochondria from here to the end of the piece of paper. We have a problem, Houston. Our ding-dang food scraps too big to go through the membranes of the mitochondrion. But nonetheless, this step takes place beginning on the outer membranes of the mitochondrion where there are enzymes, and it finishes on the inside, so it still requires a mitochondrion. So we bring our pyruvate or pyruvic acid over to the mitochondrion, and we have to carve that sucker down. So we carve off a carbon dioxide. The reason this says 2 is why? Yes, because there was another half just like it, another pyruvate, and you had to carve its carbon off also. So now it's not a 3-carbon compound, it's a 2-carbon compound that you're left with, and that is small enough to go into the mitochondrion, and it is called acetate or acetic acid, just like this was pyruvate or pyruvic acid. So there's a theme here. In the process of hacking off carbon and oxygen off your food, you also bumped off some more hydrogens. And we bumped off enough to make 2 more NADH2s. Did we make any ATP in this step? No. And this step, where you're carving it down so that you can get inside the mitochondria, is called bridge transition. You're trying to change the size of the molecule so you can get on in this organelle. So no ATP, but 2 NADH2s. Are we okay so far? Now, this acetic acid will food scrap. So if you were asked what food scrap did you start with in bridge transition step, what would you tell me? 2 pyruvates. What food scraps did you end with in bridge transition? 2 acetic acids. But it won't go in by itself into the mitochondria. So it has a carrier molecule. The name of the carrier molecule is coenzyme A. So when you hook coenzyme A to the acetic acid, it's renamed this $20 word, acetyl coenzyme A. That's when it's all hooked together. And now it gets carried into the 3rd step. And what will happen is you'll drop off the little 2-carbon compound, and the coenzyme A carrier molecule will cycle back up because you might need it again to carry another acetic acid. So that's just the abbreviation for coenzyme A. So you dropped off the 2-carbon food scrap, and it cycles back. You know it's got to go get the other one, the other 2-carbon food scrap, but it just keeps cycling back like that. So this third step is called a lot of different names, but I think the majority of us call it the Krebs cycle. Some people call it the citric acid cycle, and you'll see why in a minute, but I think most instructors call it the Krebs cycle. Krebs cycle began with a 4-carbon compound that was at the beginning of the Krebs cycle inside of the mitochondria. So this isn't anything we brought in there. That 4-carbon compound is called oxaloacetic acid. It is what binds to the 2-carbon acetic acid. So 4 carbons plus 2 carbons makes how many carbons? 6, and that's how you created the citric acid, and since it's the first thing you created, that's why some people call it that cycle, but not me. How much of that citric acid is your food scrap? 2 carbons, I love you. Just the 2 carbon that you just tacked on. So if we could just hack 2 carbons off of that, we'd be finished with that half of our food scrap leftovers. Do you agree? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to carve off one of those. So how big is our food? How big is this molecule now? 5 carbons. And that CO2 is carbons off your food and oxygen's off your food. And by the way, where have all these CO2s gone? Yeah, respiratory system out. That's where your CO2 has always come from in your body. That's why it's called inorganic. You didn't create it, you just carved it off of food and exhaled it, okay? So every time you see CO2, it's getting exhaled. So in the process of doing that, your food wasn't just made of carbon and oxygen, it also was made of hydrogens, and some of the hydrogens we knocked off once again get picked up by guess who? NAD, so right there you made 1 NADH2. So then we look down here at our 5-carbon molecule we have left. How many of these carbons is your original food scrap? You brought in a 2, you lost one of them here. How many are left on here that are your original food piece? 1. So if we carve 1 off, that 5-carbon compound becomes a 4-carbon compound, and here's the CO2 that we're going to exhale. Are you with me? And in the process of knocking off the carbon and oxygen, once again we knocked off some more hydrogens, and once again, guess who was there? NAD to make a second NADH2. Now, the name of this 5-carbon compound you started with was alpha ketogluteric acid. Alpha ketogluteric acid. When you split this carbon off, unlike when you split a carbon here, water was here in this step, not in this step, to help you. And water goes in as a wedge, remember hydrolysis, to help you rupture a bond. Therefore, when you cut this from 5 down to 4, you had more energy left over than you had in this step. So you got to do one thing down here you didn't get to do when you broke that bond. You got to put together an ADP and an inorganic phosphate and build, see the end of the arrow? You built an ATP right there in that step because you had enough energy to do it. These building blocks are just floating around in the mitochondrion or in the cytoplasm because they're an important enough molecule to reassemble. Your cells don't flush them out of the cells easily. Yeah. Is that good? Okay. Well, we're not through with this story. Is there any carbon left from your original food? No, not in this trip around, because we're only working on 1/2 right now. But Houston, we have a problem. that end intermediate compound that's 4-carbon isn't the original 4-carbon. We must modify that and get it back to oxaloacetic acid, or we can't go pick up the other 2-carbon acetic acid, because we had 2 of those. So this is representing a number of little steps, but in these steps you sling off enough hydrogen to make another NADH2. And for the first time, you make a second hydrogen acceptor compound. You make FADH2, both in that series of little intermediate steps. If you're curious, I'm not going to test you on it, but FADH2 stands for the word flavine adenine dinucleotide. So the other one was NADH2, and this is FADH2. So over here in the informative box, per turn, how many ATPs would you say you made? I'm calling this a turn around the Krebs cycle. 1. So per turn, you made 1 ATP. Per turn, how many NADH2s did you make? 3. 1 here at 3 o'clock, 1 at 6 o'clock, and 1 over here at 9 o'clock. So you made 3 NADH2s. And how many FADH2s did you make?
1.
Just the 1 at 9 o'clock. Okay. But all the way through the rest of the chart, we were talking in terms of a whole glucose. So how many turns would we have to take on Krebs cycle to process the whole glucose? 2, because we had another acetic acid. So we are going to go times 2 turns to come out with our actual yield per glucose. Get my drift? And so you'll say this ends up being 2 ATP and 6 NADH2s and 2 FADH2s. Are you following along? All right, we're ready for the last step. Now, we don't have any carbon or oxygen left of our food. We've blown all that off as CO2. The only thing we have left of our food is what? Yeah, all the hydrogen that's tied up throughout this chart in NADH2s and FADH2s. So the 4th step, which is called the cytochrome system, or more popularly it's called the electron transport system. This system is bringing in from each of the 3 above steps. So this represents step 1, step 2, step 3. So how many, if this is glycolysis, and this is bridge, and this is Krebs, how many NADH2s are coming in glycolysis per sugar? 2. You go up in your box or you look at your pathways, 2. So 2 NADH2s are coming in. How many are coming in from bridge? 2. And how many are coming in from Krebs cycle per glucose? 6. 6 NADH2. And how many FADH2s? 2 times 2 turns, remember. 2 FADH2s. Are we cool? Now, the drawing down here is representing 1 NADH2 going through, or 1 FADH2 going through. So let's do it with an NADH2 first, so that we can make sure everybody's understanding. But understand, if I do it for 1, I've got to do it a 2nd time, a 3rd time, a 4th time, 6th, 7th, 8th, a 10th time. Get my drift? And anything I made, you're going to make for each one of these that you're shooting through here. So I'm an NADH2, and here I come. when I'm inside the mitochondrion, there are compounds down the center. Now, there aren't just 3. There are at least 5 stopping places, and there might be a whole lot more than that. But the one thing that the biochemists do agree on, there's only 3 of the spots where you made some ATP. So who cares if you stop several places in between? It doesn't make you any energy, okay? So when the NADH2 comes in here, NAD loves its hydrogen. But remember, bonds are not this. Bonds are this anyway. The NAD loves its hydrogen. But when it gets over here close to the first compound, compound A loves hydrogen even better. It has a greater attraction or affinity to it. So you know what happens? This breaks off and it bonds right here temporarily. But that is a very energized bond. And the more energized you are, the more often you're like this than like this. So when that energized bond finally goes kapow, there is a huge burst of energy you release at the moment you break the hydrogen off of compound A. And that burst of energy is used to hook together an ADP and an inorganic phosphate to make, follow the arrow, an ATP. So you just made an ATP right there. But NAD is a patient little sucker. So that molecule's just been waiting there until the hydrogen was carved off of there. And so it gladly picks up its hydrogen again. So that's the same NADH2 just reformed. And it drops down to the next compound, B, and the same scenario takes place again. It loves its hydrogen, but it can't hold on to them because they're more attracted to compound B, so they bond over here. Compound B is a very energized bond, and so very shortly, kapow, it busts that bond, and in busting that bond, you release a burst of energy, and that burst of energy is used to assemble another ATP, an inorganic phosphate. So you made a second ATP. And for a third time, little NAD was nice enough to wait around and pick the hydrogen back up when it was released from compound B. So for a third time, you've reformed NADH2. And for a third time, it wants its hydrogen, but hydrogen likes compound C better. And so it comes over here and bonds. And again, it's a highly energized bond. And when it busts that bond, for a third time, you hook an inorganic phosphate and an ADP together to make a third ATP. But now NAD is pissed. And it says, enough is enough. 3 strikes, you're out. I'm not picking you back up again. So the NAD leaves without the hydrogen. And it goes back to all of the various other steps, whether that be in the mitochondria here, or whether it be back in the cytoplasm out here. We had some NADs throughout the cell, so they're not thrown away, they're recycled for use again, but they don't sit around. This is the whole reason you need oxygen in your body, right here. Oxygen is negative, and oxygen is negative, negative. Hydrogen is positive, but you're slinging 2 hydrogens off. So 1 oxygen can bond to 2 hydrogens. And so that is your final hydrogen acceptor, the oxygen. What's it going to form? Water. And that's the water you also exhale with your CO2 onto your mirror in your car. And it fogs up. So this is your final hydrogen acceptor. And if you didn't have oxygen, you wouldn't have something pulling the hydrogens off in the end, and that would stop this whole detach, attach, detach, attach, detach, attach. And that is a very important chemical reaction because every time you detach, those bursts of energy are allowing you to make ATP. So we've got to have something that attracts the hydrogen off the bottom so they keep feeding down through this pathway. When you studied in Anatomy 1 and you bonded an electron or a proton H+ to something, that was called a reduction reaction. So this is a reduction reaction when you're hooking that stuff onto that. But when you lose an electron or a hydrogen, that's called an oxidation reaction. So this is a series of oxidation reduction reactions. Oxidation reduction, oxidation reduction. They call them redox reactions for reduction and oxidation. You read that in the book and your head gets hurting and you think, oh my God, I'm going to flunk this test. No, it's just when you break a bond, you release bursts of energy, and that's very important here because it allows you to have enough energy to assemble ADP and phosphate. It's that simple. Are we okay so far? So if you didn't have NADH2, if instead you had this FADH2, here's the deal. It's not complementary to compound A. It will not do the thing with compound A. But look, it'll come in at B and C. And when it does exactly what the other molecule did. The FADH2 likes its hydrogen, but B likes its hydrogens better. It rips them off, bonds to them, it busts. When it busts, you make one ATP. FAD waited, picked it up again. The same thing happened. The hydrogen got ripped off by compound C. The bond busted. You had enough energy to make a second ATP. And in the end, FAD also said buzz you and left without the hydrogen. And the hydrogen had to hook to oxygen to get out of this oxidation reduction reaction. Are you okay? So over here in the box, per NADH2 that goes through the cytochrome system or the electron transport system, how many ATPs did you make? 3. Per FADH2, how many ATPs did you make? 2, because you skipped compound A. But where we're going in this second is we want to tally up just how many ATPs we make from all of these that are coming down through per sugar. That's where we're going next, okay? Let me ask you a question. Thinking about what your sugar has become, if it was totally catabolized, which is C6H12O6, what does it become? If it's totally catabolized, what does it become? Who? I couldn't hear you. CO2, water, and why'd you bother to do this? ATP, you get to live. That's what it ends up being if you totally busted it down. Get the picture? So we can actually see that this will end up being 6 CO2s because there were 6 carbons, and this will end up being 6 waters because there were 12 hydrogens. Now we're trying to figure out, but how many ding dang ATPs did we get? And that's where we're going next. Per sugar. You know what I mean? Balancing in the equation here. Okay. But I'm not going to make you balance it because I really haven't balanced it because some of the oxygens aren't right. So you'd have to have a few more sugars out front. But don't worry about it. These are the things that it becomes. All right. You may, all that I've said is said in outline form in those steps, and you should read it over and see if anything weirds you out. But this is where we are now. We want to know the total amount of ATP made in your body per glucose. Now what I want you to do, this is it in paragraph form. I really don't want you to read that right now. I want you to get out another sheet of paper or something to write on. Is there anybody desperate for a piece of paper? Are you okay? You're welcome. Total ATP made from one glucose in a human. I want you to set it up like this. I want you to go glycolysis, and leave some space, and bridge transition, and Krebs cycle. And then I want you to come over here and put electron transport system. There's a reason. Now remember, you've got those informative boxes you've been filling out, and that's going to help you right now. So, did you make any ATP outright in glycolysis? How many? Okay. I'm going to say you gross 4 ATP, you net 2 ATP. And if I asked you, why did you only net 2 ATP, what is your answer? It took 2 ATP to position the glucose to break it the first time, remember? So I'm going to say you lost 2 ATP positioning the glucose to carve it in half. You lost 2 ATP positioning the glucose. Is there anybody who doesn't understand that? Okay, that's cleared up. Did you make any NADH2 in glycolysis? Yes. How many? 2. But if you don't run this last step, those 2 NADH2s never get turned into ATPs. They only become ATPs if you haul this to the mitochondria and run it through the cytochrome compounds. Compound A, B, and C are called cytochrome compounds. All right? So we've got to ... haul this over to here. Well, remember where you were, people? You were in the cytoplasm. Anywhere else, you're in a mitochondrion. It costs you to get carried to the mitochondrion. So this is going to cost 2 ATP to move the NADH2 from the cytoplasm into the mitochondrion. But let me ask you a question. Every NADH2 that goes through made you how many ATP? 3. Okay? So 2 NADH2s, if you didn't talk about this, 2 NADH2s, each making 3 ATPs each, would be a total of how many ATP? 6. So it's 6 ATP when they're run through the cytochrome transport system, minus the 2 to move the NADH2 to the mitochondria. So this really is the answer 4. Do you agree?
Where did the 6 come from? I'm sorry.
If you take one of these NADH2s and you run it through electron transport system, it makes an ATP here, here, and here. And then you've got another one. So that's 1, 2, 3, and then the second one, 4, 5, 6. Okay? That's what we're saying, is they have to come down here into this electron transport system and go through cytochrome compounds A, B, and C to make their ATPs. So it made 6 gross, but you only net 4 because you had to pay for moving the NADH2 over. That is the only time you have to pay to move an NADH2. All of the rest of them were at the mitochondrion already, so you don't have to pay for any more, just those first 2, because they were in the cytoplasm. Are you ready? Did you, looking at your informative boxes, make any ATP in bridge transition? No, you did not. Did you make any NADH2? How many? 2. 2 NADH2, which become nothing unless you run them through electron transport system. So here we go, dot, 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 dot. And how many will they become? 6, 3 each. And you're at the mitochondrion here, so it doesn't cost you anything to move them over into the electron transport system. In Krebs cycle, did you make any ATP? We're doing it per sugar. So this is 2 turns, because 2 turns is per sugar. How many ATP did you make? How many? Just talk about the 2 that you outright made. You made 1 in the first turn down at 6 o'clock and 1 at the second turn. Okay? Did you make any NADH2s? How many per turn? 3, so 6 total. Y'all are thinking good, that's right. 6 NADH2 in 2 turns. Did you make any FADH2s? How many total? 2, 1 per turn. Is there anybody who doesn't see that? Now, you've already made these 2 ATPs, so you don't have to haul them over to step 4, the electron transport system. But these, you do. Dot, 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 dot. Every NADH2 becomes how many ATPs? 3. And so 3 times 6 is how many ATPs? 18 ATPs. FADH2. Every FADH2 becomes how many ATPs? 2, because it skips cytochrome compound A. But I have 2 of these, so how many is that going to be? 4 ATPs. So there it is, summarized on a chart, everything you make. So let's total the puppy up. Let's do it gross first. 4 and 2 is 6. I'm making me a little laundry list over here. 6 ATP that you made in the steps. So I have 4 and 2 more is 6. And then all the other ATPs were made over here. So 6 right there. And 6 there is 12. And 18 there is 30. And 4 more is 34 ATP gross in the ETS, the electron transport system. Are you seeing enough? Does everybody see? Push it up. More? What?
Where does the 6 ATP come from on top, like how the 34?
Because you made 4 outright in glycolysis, gross, and you made 2 more at 6 o'clock in the Krebs cycle. That's where those came from.
You don't count those in the total?
Yeah, I put them right there. They're in my laundry list. And then all the other ones were over here under step 4. So step 4 added up to 34, made in the electron transport system. Yes, ma'am?
Is this just the gross summary?
Yeah, this is the gross. That's why I should have had a different colored pen. This is the gross in red. Okay, so what is your gross answer? Let me buzz this down. 40. 40 ATP gross per sugar,
What about the,
okay, per sugar.
so we're not doing anything with the net?
Yeah, we're going to do it now, okay? But all those 40 aren't usable because you cost yourself some. The places you cost yourself were related to glycolysis and moving into electron transport. So if you want to use actual money to live off of, you got to subtract the 2 out for positioning the glucose, and you got to subtract the 2 out for moving the NADH2 into the mitochondrion. So what is your net? So this would be minus the 2 ATP for positioning glucose and minus the 2 ATP for NADH2 transport out of the cytoplasm, which was also in step 1, trying to get into step 4. So if this was your gross, and now you're having to minus this and minus this, what's your net? (36 ATP per glucose in a human.
Did you get that again?
What part? Did you get the 40?
40 and 36.
You got the 40 though? You understood how we got there?
You added the.
Yeah. So if we had the 40 gross, we have to now go say, yeah, but we never subtracted out ATPs we used up for doing work. So we used up 2 ATP for positioning the glucose, and we used up 2 more ATP for moving the NADH2 out of the cytoplasm. So that's what I've just re-summarized down here where I went minus. I rewrote those 2 for the work we did.
Can you go up to the top?
Oh. Is everybody okay up top now? Do you need me to go back down to the bottom, Alexis?
Yes, please.
Is there anybody who doesn't get it? Raise your hand if you're in microbiology. If you're in microbiology, you learn that the microorganism made 38 ATP per glucose. Did you not? Do you remember that? Why? What do bacteria not have that we have in this story? They don't have organelles. They don't have mitochondria. So if they do not have mitochondria, you're not going to get cost these 2 ATPs right here for moving from the general protoplasm, which is the cytoplasm of the bacteria, into a mitochondrion because they don't have one. They just fold their outer cell wall and do all the reactions right there. So in some microbes, this number will be 2 higher. And there might be one exception or so in the body where you get 2 higher. But the majority of places in the body work like this, and we're going with the majority. But it's because we have organelles. All right. But otherwise, everything I'm saying to you would transfer right over to microbiology and make sense to you if you have it in the future. And then it should apply. So that's a lot of energy from one sugar molecule. Okay? A lot more than when you were just taking a glucose and running it only through glycolysis and only getting 2 usable net ATPs. But you could only do that for 20 seconds, 30 at the most. This you can do all day long as we're in this sedentary state where we can breathe in oxygen at the rate that this system is demanding that we have it available. So this is what we usually run off of. Okay, so again, can I have this now? Raise your hand if you're not done. So again, I would take the time if I were you then to go through the outline of notes, which begins total ATP made per glucose, and make sure you agree with everything that you're reading. But it's up to you how you want to learn it, whether you want to do it off a chart or do it off of an outline form. It's essentially telling you the same thing. But if you come up with questions, write them in the margin so that you can ask me about them. Okay? All right. Go back to your picture page. This. What if I run out of glucose sugar? What if I used up all my glucose sugar like this, and I'm not eating right now? What do I go to next? What? Not yet. Huh? Starch. Good girl. So when we started this story, did you have this page out front? So your first choice is going to be glucose, but then your next choice, and if it wasn't this 6-carbon sugar, if it was one of those others I told you absorbed from your diet, galactose, which was half of a milk sugar, or fructose, which was half of table sugar, those are still 6-carbon sugars, and all of these things right here have the formula C6H12O6. So the only difference between them is how they're arranged in space. So your liver can take any of these 3 hexose sugars, 6-carbon sugars, and turn them into glucose. So your liver will do that if you need more glucose. It'll turn those other 6 carbons into glucose. But let's say you've depleted all the possible glucose you have, then Grace is right, you will go to starch. And the most common starch in the human body is glycogen. What is it made of? Nothing but glucoses. So now your liver will break this down into glucose because the liver has the enzymes to do that. And it'll release those into your bloodstream. One form, by the way, of sugar diabetes, diabetes mellitus, doesn't have a darn thing to do with not making enough insulin. It's that you have a liver malfunction and your liver is too over-enthusiastically dumping sugar into your bloodstream. So that's another form of diabetes mellitus. It's not all an insulin story. But anyway, and that's why your loved ones that have diabetes mellitus are supposed to exercise, because there's something about exercising, like even walking, that opens the pore channels of all your tissue cells, cell membranes, and lets glucose come in, even if that person's not making a bit of insulin. And diabetics don't understand. That's why they're trying to get the diabetic to exercise, is because it improves your glucose transport into the cell. I think if they understood that, they would be a little more compliant. They just think you're calling me a fatty again. You know, we live and hear that all our life. You're fat, lose weight. No, it improves your glucose transport into your cell. Okay. So we're going to use starch. So that is what your picture page is showing you right there, is breaking down glycogen starch and giving yourself some more glucose. This breaking down sugar was called glycolysis. This breaking down starch is called glycogenolysis. Glycogenolysis. Are you with me? And once you're a glucose, we didn't know you were originally a starch. Now you're just like any other glucose in the pathway, and you go down through and make as many ATPs per glucose that came off the starch as you would have if you'd have eaten glucose in the first place. Clear enough? Okay. Now I've used up a lot of my sugar, a lot of my starch. Now where do you go? Lipids, fats. That's where you're going to go. However, you need another note paper? Your body has lots of plans for lipids in your body. And being burned up to make ATP is not very high on the priority list. You need this, Mila? Okay. From Anatomy 1, it makes fat pads around almost all your important organs. You got a big fatty sac you saw earlier this semester around your heart. You've got the greater omentum fat apron over your intestines. You've got fat pads you learned this week around your kidney. So those are shock absorbers on your vital organs. So that's an important role of fat. In Anatomy 1, the definition of cell membrane structure, and it's not just the outer cell membrane, it's the membrane around every organelle, was a double layer of phospholipid plus a little bit of protein and cholesterol. So the main structure in your cell membranes was a fat known as a phospholipid. So that's a priority. Growth of cell membranes and cell division, that's going to be high on the priority list. Insulation. In every state of the nation, it's usually colder than your body with the exception of Florida and Arizona. So most people are counting on that over 50% fat that's in the subcutaneous or hypodermis layer of your skin, holding your warmth in. We don't appreciate it. When you studied nervous tissue last semester, you were supposed to learn about a fatty sheath that was wrapped around every one of your nerve cells, neurons. That was called the myelin sheath. That's why your pediatricians say, now moms, don't you dare be giving non-fat milk to that newborn kid of yours until they're past their toddler years, because their brain is growing so much from birth till 2 years of age. You could actually stunt their intellectual ability if you don't give them enough fat to make the insulating sheaths around their neurons. Because the more fat you have around a nerve cell, the faster it sends a nerve impulse. And faster is better in the case of nerve activity. Okay? So you know, I know you don't want your little kids picked on, but babies go through a little fat stage. That's a natural stage. They're born with no fat. That's why you have to wrap them in a receiving blanket, and people in your family are going, why are you wrapping that baby up? It's hot as hell in here. They have no fat. They can't regulate the temperature, so they need a little lightweight receiving blanket around them to protect them from drafts and things when they're first born. Okay? So don't be a mother that or a father that goes, I don't want a little fat kid, they'll get picked on. That's sometimes just a stage of growth. Little girls go through a thick stage, and then when they sprout up, they'll thin out. Just get over it. Vitalipids. Those are the vitamins that were fat soluble. A, E, and K are flat up fats. D is a steroid with fat solubility. From Anatomy 1, you learned about a hormone group that don't travel in your bloodstream. They just control the cell where they're made, or maybe the next door neighbor's cell, for daily housekeeping chores, to keep you fed, or keep waste going out, or keep the cell dividing when it should. Those are called prostaglandins, and those are fatty acids. So that's a fat subunit. They are lubricants throughout our body. Cerumen, the oil of your skin from from sebaceous oil glands. Cerumen, the wax in your ear to protect that sense organ. That is a lipid. And oddly enough, it's made by a modified sudoriferous sweat gland. And way, way down the list, and I may not even have a complete list up here yet, we use lipids to break their carbon-to-carbon bonds to make ATP. But it's way, way down the list. But if you do it, they're very impressive. They give you, per 1 gram of lipid, they will give you 9 calories of energy. Remember, per gram of carbohydrate, you only got 4 calories of energy. So this thing's more than twice the amount of energy. It'd be great if we could burn it up. But your body's not going to let you, usually, because it's got all these other things it wants to use your fats for. So it's way down the priority list, but it's very good if you do end up using it. So we're going to come back to your picture page in a minute, but before we do, is everybody done with this? Holler if you're not. So find this number 6, metabolism of lipids. And we want to go to catabolism, breakdown of lipids. So of course there's going to be a name for it. It is called, if the other thing was called glycolysis and glycogenolysis, this is called lipolysis, to split a lipid, lipolysis. Looks like lipolysis, but lipolysis. And you have a little abbreviated list of some of the uses of lipids, so now you have a more complete list. But if we are going to break it down, you start with the most common neutral fat that we ingest, triglycerides, which are stored in adipose connective tissue found all around your body. And so the first thing you have to do is mobilize this. This says metabolized. It should say mobilized from adipose connective tissue, where you're going to go to the liver. Remember, the liver is the organ that decides who gets to get broken down and who gets to get stored up. So in the case of breaking down the fat, you'll mobilize it out of your adipose cells, send it to your liver, and then your liver has the enzymes to start splitting it. Well, when you digest it, 1 glycerol and 3 fatty acids result. A glycerol is a 3-carbon compound. It, however, is not the 3-carbon compound right there. It looks more like this one right here. So the glycerol will be changed by your liver into PGAL, and then that half of the lipid can fit in right there. So you got a big entry arrow right there on your sheet showing where it will enter. It already tells you the glycerol of a lipid will be changed into PGAL, and you'll follow that arrow right in right there on your picture page. Phosphoglyceraldehyde. Now, it says it here too. Okay? And it enters catabolism as PGAL, and it proceeds forward from that point, and it can make all the ATPs from that point onward, as though it had been that half of a sugar in the first place. The problem with the fat is with the big, long fatty acids. And would you remember that I told you they could be hundreds of hydrocarbons long? So I've drawn you, so they're nicknamed hydrocarbons because they are a heck of a lot of carbon, and all these carbons are loaded up with hydrogens. I've just been lazy and not put them on there. Very little oxygen, just a couple of oxygens in a fatty acid. Well, anyway, what your liver will do with these is take them through a beta oxidation reaction. If we were using the English alphabet, we'd go down that carbon chain and we'd label every carbon. Your carbon A, your carbon B, your carbon A, your carbon B, A, B, A, B. Beta oxidation means at every B carbon you're then going to cut it. So you end up with 2 carbon pieces. Except they didn't use the American alphabet, they used the Greek alphabet. So it's alpha beta. So you went alpha beta, alpha beta, alpha beta, alpha beta, and after every beta carbon, the liver chops it. So you end up with these 2 carbon pieces that were your old fatty acid. Lots of them, because this thing is hundreds of hydrogens and carbons long. And most of them, this is all done in the liver, most of them end up becoming ketone bodies, 2 carbons that aren't usable in our picture page yet. A few of them, some, immediately become acetic acid. Well, if you were that group, no problem. We can stick you in at the end of bridge transition, and you can go right on in to make a turnaround Krebs cycle, correct? Making any of the NADH2s and ATPs and FADH2s. But the bulk of them are this unusable piece. And your liver goes, I don't have the enzymes to fix it, to turn 2 carbon ketone bodies into 2 carbon acetic acid. So your liver dumps these into your blood. And from your blood, they go out to your typical body cells. And your body cells do have the enzymes that can change ketone bodies into acetic acids. And so finally, they're usable, and in those cells, they can enter the end of bridge and go forward into Krebs cycle. This is why the resulting 2 carbon ketone bodies, that's why when you're burning fats, you are usually in a condition known as ketosis. Osis, conditions that cause a buildup of ketones. When a diabetic isn't giving his body cells sugar, because he doesn't have insulin to make the sugar go into the body cells, his body cells are going, I'm starving, I'm starving. So they go and burn fat, the diabetic does. And they burn the fat and they get into ketosis. That's one of the things they get into, from burning a lot of fat. Where's it going next if it's a waste? Morning lab. To your urinary system. And so you start having ketone bodies show up in your urine, which they're not supposed to. And that's, as you learned today in lab, ketonuria, URIA, ketones in your urine. So it's an indicator that you're either dieting heavily and burning fats, or you have something like diabetes mellitus, sugar diabetes, and you're burning fat because you can't get your glucose in your cells. Okay? All right. But ultimately, all of these things, good or bad, have to become who? No, well, they're going to be ATP, but they have to become acetic acid, and then they can enter in at the end of bridge. Right? Okay, just so you know the big picture. I guess you're leaving me. All right, we'll stop there for now. I will see